Please help it hot.
Stay quiet. Don't leave me here.
Mafia Korean boss saw the nurse slap his pregnant wife. What he did will shock you. Imagine being in labor, alone in a VIP hospital room, begging for help, and instead of a doctor, the nurse slaps you, takes your phone, disables the call button, and locks the door. That's exactly what happened to Amara on the night her daughter was born. And she had no idea a security camera was watching, or that her husband, the man the whole city feared, was about to see everything. The slap was so loud it drowned out the baby's heartbeat. Amara Chenhan's head whipped to the side, her cheek exploding with pain just as another contraction tore through her body. The VIP maternity suite on the 27th floor of Nari Grace Hospital was supposed to be a sanctuary. Soft golden lights, a skyline view of Seoul, the best equipment money could buy. Right now, it felt like a cage. "Stop screaming," Nurse Seomira snapped, her English clipped and cold. "You think just because your mafia husband pays for this room, you can disturb the whole floor?" Amara's fingers shook as they crept up to the burning print on her face. I just asked for help," she whispered. "The contractions are too close. Something feels wrong. Please, just check the baby, please." Mira rolled her eyes, checking the monitor without really looking. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years. You are not special. Your pain is not more important than anyone else's peace." There was no one else on the floor. Amara knew it. She'd heard the staff gossiping about cancellations, empty rooms, a quiet night, which meant no one was going to hear her scream. "My phone." Amara tried again, desperation clawing through the pain. "Please, I need to call my husband. He doesn't know I'm in labor. He needs to know." Mira's gaze slid to the bedside table. In one smooth motion, she snatched up the phone. "This interferes with the equipment," she lied, turning it over in her hand. "You don't need distractions. If your precious boss wanted to be here, he would be. He's not answering because you are not his priority." "That's not true," Amara choked. "He promised." Mira walked to the wall and slammed her thumb on the red call button until the light died. "You won't be needing this either. You press for every little discomfort. No one will come when it's real." "This is real," Amara cried. "I'm in labor. I need help. I need a doctor." "You need to stop thinking everything revolves around you." Mira's hand brushed the discreet metal plate above the door handle. Click. Amara froze. "Did you just lock the door?" "There are patients downstairs who actually need us," Mira said calmly. "People who didn't buy their way onto the VIP floor." "My baby," Amara whispered. "Please, just check her heartbeat. If something's wrong..." "The machine would be screaming," Mira said, without looking at the monitor. "All I see is a spoiled woman having a normal labor and acting like she's dying." She opened the door. "Don't go," Amara begged, voice breaking. "Please, I'm scared." Mira stepped into the hallway and looked back one last time, eyes full of something dark and ugly. "My husband lost everything because of men like yours. Tonight you can think about that." The door shut. The lock slid home. Silence swallowed the room. No phone, no call button, no husband, just the relentless rise of the next contraction and the knowledge that the woman who was supposed to help her wanted her to suffer. Pain slammed into her and she screamed, the sound ripping out of her throat, bouncing off the walls, dying against the locked door. No one came. High in the corner, half hidden by the molding, a small black dome watched with a blinking red eye. A security camera. Silent. Recording. Remembering. Amara didn't see it, but someone else would. She thought no one would ever know what happened in that room, but she had no idea who was about to see everything. If you believe no woman should ever be treated like this, hit like right now so more people see this story. and stay with me until the end to see what her husband does. Trust me, you won't expect it. The Mirai Tower pierced the Seoul skyline like a needle pointing at heaven. On the 39th floor, in a private dining room that cost more per hour than most people made in a week, Han Jun-seok sat at the head of a table and played the part he'd been perfecting for 3 years, the respectable businessman. His suit was charcoal, Italian, tailored so precisely that the seams seemed to be part of the fabric itself rather than something added on top. His watch was understated but expensive, an old Patek Philippe that had belonged to his grandfather before his grandfather had to sell it to pay off gambling debts. His tie was silk, and his hands, which had once broken bones with the kind of casual efficiency that made men confess their sins, were folded on the table like he was just another member of the legitimate business world, like he'd never beaten a man bloody in a basement for skimming from shipments, like he'd never ordered someone to disappear for informing to the prosecutors, like his entire fortune wasn't built on the bones of people who'd gotten in his way. Across the table sat Chairman Lee Choi, the kind of old money that wore its power so casually that you might miss it if you weren't paying attention. He had jowls and liver spots, and a way of speaking that made it clear he'd forgotten more about business than Jun-seok would ever know. He'd also, according to Jun-seok's intelligence, been investigating him for the past 6 months. The Harbor Commission approved the licenses this morning, Chairman Choi said, swirling his whiskey with the kind of confidence that only came from knowing you'd already won. The paperwork will be ready for signature by tomorrow. Once you sign, the East routes are yours. Exclusive distribution agreements with all the major shippers. No one, not even the old families, will be able to compete. It was worth 400 billion won. It was also a trap, though Choi didn't know that Jun-seok knew that. The exclusive licenses were real. The legitimate opportunity was real. What wasn't real was the suggestion that once Jun-seok signed, the prosecutors would leave him alone. What wasn't real was the implication that he could actually step out of the shadows and become clean. You didn't walk away from Jun-seok's world. You got carried out. But for Amara, he'd been trying anyway. His phone vibrated softly against the table. He didn't look at it. One of Choi's men, a younger executive named Kim who had more ambition than sense, glanced at the phone, then back at Jun-seok's face. Jun-seok watched the calculation happen in real time. Was this a weakness? Was the great Han Jun-seok actually distracted by something? The phone vibrated again. Behind Jun-seok's chair stood Kang Dae-ho, his right hand, the one man who'd been with him since they were kids stealing from convenience stores. Dae-ho's expression didn't change, but Jun-seok felt the subtle tension in his posture shift. Dae-ho knew the pattern. Amara usually messaged when she reached the hospital, and then again every hour or so if she was nervous. Late at night, if she was having trouble sleeping, she'd call just to hear his voice. But right now, it was nearly 3 in the morning. "You seem distracted," one of the older men said, not unkindly. He was someone's uncle, someone's connection to the political world, the kind of person you couldn't entirely trust but couldn't entirely ignore. "Not at all," Jun-seok replied smoothly. His English was accented but precise, polished in boardrooms and law offices. His Korean, when he used it, was equally careful, the Korean of someone who'd taught himself to fit in, rather than the Korean of someone who'd been born into the language naturally. "I'm simply listening." The phone vibrated again. Jun-seok could see the screen light up from the corner of his eye. He didn't look directly at it. That would be weakness. That would be showing that something outside this room mattered more than the moment that was unfolding here. Chairman Choi slid the leather contract folder across the table. "This agreement," he said, "protects your transition. The prosecutors have been looking at your past operations for some time now, as I'm sure you're aware. But this harbor deal, it legitimizes everything. Once these licenses are yours, your entire operation becomes respectable. Shipping is a respectable business. Logistics is a respectable business. And suddenly, all those questions about your previous activities become irrelevant. Old news. Settled history. It was a beautiful pitch. In another life, if Jun Seok had been someone else, someone without 17 years of blood and fear behind him, he might have believed it. The truth was simpler and uglier. This deal was the chain they were wrapping around his neck. Once he signed, he'd be valuable to them. And valuable meant controllable. It meant they could ask for favors, for access to his network, for his cooperation in whatever schemes they were cooking up. It meant he'd traded one kind of prison for another. But it would also be worth it if it meant his daughter would grow up knowing she could be proud of her father. If it meant Amara could walk into a room without wondering what kind of compromises he'd made that day. If it meant he was actually changing. The phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't just a vibration, it was ringing. Softly because he'd muted the speaker, but the screen flashed with unmistakable clarity. Amara Jun Seok's jaw tightened minutely. It was the only tell he allowed himself, the only crack in the facade. "Perhaps you should take that," Chairman Choi said, watching him with the careful attention of a man who knew how to read power dynamics. "A call at this hour, it seems important." It was a test, a way to gauge whether Jun Seok's priorities were where they claimed to be, on business, on legitimacy, on becoming a respectable man, or whether they were elsewhere. "It's not important," Jun Seok said, and he turned the phone face down on the table. Around the room, the tension shifted slightly. A few men relaxed. This was the answer they wanted to hear. That Jun Seok was committed. That he understood what was at stake. That he was willing to sacrifice for the deal. The phone was silent for about 15 seconds. Then it started vibrating again. Same number. Same insistence. Jun Seok's hand stayed in place. His expression remained calm. But something in his chest had started to tighten. A knot of instinct and worry and a voice that kept asking, "What if something's wrong?" "She must be very dedicated to the marriage," one of the older men said with a chuckle. "Or very suspicious." Jun Seok smiled, and it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Most wives appreciate it when their husbands prioritize their professional obligations. "Is that what we are?" another man asked. "Professional obligations?" "The most important ones," Jun Seok replied. The phone went quiet. For about 2 minutes, it was silent. Jun Seok picked up the pen. The weight of it in his hand felt significant, like he was signing away more than just a business deal, like he was signing away part of himself. He pressed the point to the paper, ready to write his name. The phone started ringing again. This time it was a different number. Still Seoul. Still someone who had his direct line. And then, while the ringing was still going, another notification popped up on the screen. A text from his trusted lieutenant. The only person besides Daeho who knew how to reach him in sealed meetings. "Hyung," she called the hospital. "Something about your wife." Jun Seok's hand went very still. Chairman Choi was watching him. All the men were watching him. This was the critical moment they'd understand later. This was when they saw whether Han Jun Seok was actually trying to become legitimate, or whether he was just another gangster in an expensive suit pretending at respectability. The phone continued to vibrate with the incoming call. Jun Seok stared at the pen in his hand. Then slowly he set it down. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He simply stood up, buttoned his jacket with careful precision, and looked at Chairman Choi. "I have to go," he said. "Mr. Han?" Choi began, his tone suggesting this was a negotiation, that Jun Seok's departure was something that could be discussed. "Surely this is not the time to—" "If you try to stop me from leaving," Jun Seok said, his voice dropping into a register that had nothing to do with boardrooms or legitimacy or the careful performance he'd been giving, "you will not see tomorrow." The words were soft. The men around the table understood immediately. This wasn't a threat made by a businessman. This was a threat made by something older, something darker. Something that had been buried under tailored suits and careful English, but never actually gone away. Jun Seok picked up his phone and walked out of the room. Behind him, he heard Chairman Choi exhale slowly. Well? The old man said to no one in particular. It seems the leopard cannot change his spots after all. But that wasn't true. Jun Seok had been trying to change his spots, had been sacrificing pieces of his power, his freedom, his very self to become someone his daughter wouldn't be ashamed of. What he hadn't counted on was someone taking away the one thing he was trying to protect in the first place. He hadn't counted on someone hurting Amara, and that, more than anything, was going to change everything. The contractions had stopped being separated by moments of relief sometime around 4 a.m. Now they were just continuous mountains of pain, one crest merging into the next, before Amara could even catch her breath. Her body was doing what bodies did in labor. It was working, contracting, preparing, and the clinical knowledge that everything was normal didn't help one bit. Her cheek was swollen. She could feel it now, the bruise forming, the heat of trauma on her skin. Every time she wiped away tears, her fingers brushed the tender spot, and pain radiated across her face. She'd tried the call button again about 20 minutes into her solitude, pressing it desperate and shaking. Nothing happened. The red light didn't even blink. She understood then that Mira had disabled it, not just turned it off. She'd actually removed Amara's ability to call for help. The door was still locked. Amara had gotten out of bed once, trying to see if she could open it. But the contractions had come too. Quickly, and she'd collapsed to her knees on the cold floor, gasping. She'd had to crawl back to the bed, pull herself up using the railings, and lie there feeling every bit of the helplessness that Mira had wanted her to feel. The monitor beeped steadily. The baby's heart rate was fine, whatever that meant. Amara took some comfort in that. At least her daughter seemed okay, even if her mother was falling apart. Another contraction was building. Amara could feel the pressure starting low, spreading across and upward, the familiar tightening. She tried to remember to breathe, to relax, to do any of the things the prenatal instructor had taught her, but her body wasn't cooperating. Her body was just suffering, moment by moment, second by second, and the fear was worse than the pain, because the fear asked questions the pain didn't have to answer. What if something's wrong? What if this isn't normal? What if the baby gets stuck? What if... Stop, she whispered to herself. Stop thinking. Just breathe. But her thoughts wouldn't stop. They spiraled, feeding on the exhaustion and the hormones, and the fact that she was utterly, completely alone. The contraction crested. Amara gripped the bed rails and cried out, not screaming like before, but a lower, more guttural sound, like an animal in pain. She'd read somewhere that women in labor often sounded like animals, that labor was this primal thing that stripped away civilization. She'd thought that was beautiful once, back when she was reading books and imagining the experience. Nothing about this felt beautiful. When the contraction released her, she lay gasping, muscles trembling. Sweat had soaked through the hospital gown. Her hair was plastered to her forehead. She was so tired. How much longer? She asked the empty room, the monitors, the uncaring machines. How much longer until this is over? No one answered. The room was utterly silent except for the steady beep of the fetal monitor. Outside the window, Seoul was beginning to shift from night toward morning. The sky was still dark, but there was the faintest hint of gray on the horizon, the suggestion that dawn was coming. Amara had never wanted morning to come so badly in her life. Maybe when it was daylight things would be different. Maybe staff would change shifts. Maybe someone would actually listen. Maybe. The door opened. Amara's heart jumped. This time it would be Mira, probably, coming to torment her further. But maybe she'd brought help. Maybe she'd felt a moment of conscience and was coming to actually do her job. It was Mira. But she wasn't alone. She had a younger woman with her. Someone who looked tired and overwhelmed. Someone whose name tag read Park Ji-woo, nursing assistant. "This patient has been uncooperative," Mira said in rapid Korean to Ji-woo. "She's been pressing the call button repeatedly when there is no emergency, just discomfort. She's dramatic. Typical of women like her." Ji-woo glanced at Amara, her expression unreadable. She was maybe 25, with kind eyes that immediately looked away. Amara tried anyway. "Please," she said. "My phone was taken. The call button's been disabled. I've been alone for hours. I need to call my husband. I need a doctor. Something's not right." "Your vitals are fine," Mira cut her off coldly. "The monitor is fine. The baby is fine. What's not fine is your attitude." "My attitude?" Amara's voice cracked. "You hit me. You locked me in here. I've been in labor alone for hours." "And?" Mira moved to adjust the IV with jerky movements. "Women have been giving birth since the beginning of time. You are not the first. You are not special. Your discomfort is not more important than the actual suffering of people who have lost everything." Her eyes flashed, and Amara could see the pain underneath the cruelty. Could understand on some level that this wasn't just about her. This was about Mira's own trauma, her own rage, her own version of a story where Amara and Junseok and his empire were the villains. "Your husband," Mira continued, "is the kind of man who destroys families, who destroys lives. And then he plays house with a foreign woman, draping her in jewelry, and everyone's supposed to forget about the bodies left behind." "I didn't hurt anyone," Amara whispered. "You benefit," Mira hissed. "Your comfort is built on someone else's suffering, and you don't even have the grace to feel guilty about it." Another contraction was coming. Amara could feel it starting, that low pressure building, and all she could think was that she had no way to stop this. No way to call for help. No way to make this woman understand that she was just a person who loved someone, not a symbol of anything. "Please," Amara said as the pain started to climb. "Please, just get a doctor." Mira turned away and walked out without responding. Ji-woo followed, and this time the door closed more quietly. Less like a prison door slamming, more like a whisper of finality. Amara was alone again. The contraction hit, and she couldn't hold it in. She screamed. Not the controlled laboring sound she'd been trying for, but a genuine cry for help that echoed off the walls and the locked door and all the equipment designed to keep her comfortable while making her suffer. When it finally passed, she lay in the silence and felt something dark settle into her chest. No one was coming. She understood that now. No one was coming because no one knew, and no one would know unless she found a way to tell them. And the locked door stood between her and any way out. The temperature in the Mirai Tower's 39th floor executive bathroom dropped about 10 degrees the moment Junseok read the text message again. "Hyung," she called the hospital. "Something about your wife." His lieutenant wouldn't have sent that if it wasn't serious. Daeho's relationship with Amara was strictly professional, cordial at best, but he had a code that Junseok had instilled in all his men. Family came first. If a man's woman was in trouble, everything stopped. Junseok called his driver. "Get the car ready, we're leaving immediately." Then he called the hospital's main line. It took 6 transfers before he got someone who could actually help him. "Mr. Han?" The administrator's voice was nervous, carefully controlled. "I understand you're asking about your wife?" "She's in labor," Junseok said. "I dropped her off 3 hours ago. I want to know what's happening with her." Pause. The kind of pause that meant something. "Your wife is in active labor. the administrator finally said. She's stable. The baby's heartbeat is normal. Everything is progressing as it should. Then why would she call you? Another pause, longer this time. She expressed that she was having difficulty reaching you, the administrator said carefully. She said she needed her husband to be informed of her condition. Junseok's jaw clenched. Amara had called the hospital. His wife, in labor, had called the hospital administration to ask them to get a message to him because she couldn't reach him. Which meant something was wrong enough to make her panic. Which meant, "Put a doctor with her right now," he said. His voice dropped into the register he usually saved for men who'd disappointed him. "I don't care what you have to do. I want a physician in her room in the next 3 minutes. Mr. Han, the head nurse on the VIP floor is very experienced, I assure you." "I didn't ask about the nurse's experience," Junseok said. "I asked about a doctor. Can that be arranged?" Let me check her status. If she's not yet in advanced labor." "My wife called your hospital because she couldn't reach me," Junseok interrupted. His voice was quiet now, which was infinitely more dangerous. "That suggests to me that something is not right. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Can you get a doctor to her room, or do I need to make this more complicated?" The administrator understood the subtext. The question wasn't really about medical protocol. It was about what would happen if this man, the boss, the one whose name made people make decisions that bent around normal rules, was not satisfied with the answer. "I'll check on her right away, sir. I'll personally see to it." Junseok hung up without saying goodbye. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. The man looking back was expensive and carefully constructed, but underneath was someone older and harder. Someone who'd made his first kill at 19. Someone who'd survived every attempt to remove him from power. Someone who didn't lose at games like this. And he was about to lose the one thing that mattered most if he didn't move now. He walked back into the dining room. The men were still talking business, discussing the harbor deal, making plans for how to move forward with the exclusive licenses. They didn't look at him immediately. That wouldn't be protocol. But Junseok could feel their attention shift the moment he crossed the threshold. "I need to leave," he said. Chairman Choi didn't look up from his whiskey. "The paperwork can wait," Junseok said. "Something's come up. Something that requires my immediate attention." "More important than 400 billion won?" the chairman asked mildly. "I don't imagine that's possible." Junseok met his eyes. "My wife is in labor. Something is wrong. So yes, infinitely more important than the money." For a moment no one moved. The implication hung in the air like smoke, that Junseok was choosing his wife over the deal, his family over the power, his heart over his head. It was unprecedented. It was weakness. It was also his final answer, written in his tone and his posture, and the way his hand moved toward his jacket to check for his keys and his phone. "If you leave now," one of the younger men said, not unkindly, just stating facts, "you're walking away from legitimacy. You're rejecting the lifeline we're offering." "Then I'll drown," Junseok said simply. "But at least I'll drown with my family." He turned toward the door. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Chairman Choi said, his voice sharp with a warning edge. Junseok stopped, turned back, looked at the old man with a gaze that had nothing of the businessman left in it. "And why is that?" "Because there are men in this room who might take it as an insult. Who might think that you value the woman over the partnership. Who might decide that if you're going to walk away, you should walk away permanently." It was a threat. Thinly veiled, but real. Junseok smiled. It was the smile of someone who'd walked through worse than threats, who'd faced down actual weapons and actual violence and actual death, and come out the other side. "Then I suggest those men think very carefully about what happens next," he said softly, "because I'm leaving. And if anyone tries to stop me, if anyone tries to prevent me from getting to my wife, those men will learn exactly why my reputation is what it is. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room understood. Dae-ho moved out of position by the door, understanding that his boss was done being careful, done being the businessman. Back in the old days, before Jun-seok decided to try for legitimacy, this is what it had always looked like when someone crossed him. This sudden absence of restraint. This dropping of the mask. The men at the table exchanged glances. Some of them had lived long enough to recognize the point of no return. To understand that Han Jun-seok wasn't bluffing. No one moved to stop him. Jun-seok walked toward the door, his driver already moving to meet him in the hallway, already pulling up the GPS location of Nari Grace Hospital on his phone. Just as they reached the threshold, Dae-ho stopped. "Hyung," he said. His voice carried the weight of brotherhood, and the years they'd survived together. "Whatever we walk into, we handle it," Jun-seok finished. "Legally, cleanly. I'm not going back to the old ways." "And if someone gives us no choice?" Jun-seok glanced back at the boardroom, at the men watching them leave, at the future that was evaporating with every step. "Then we choose differently," he said. He didn't sound entirely convinced. "What would you do? Finish the most important deal of your life? Or walk out for the person you love? Comment what you'd do before you see what he does next." The car cut through the Seoul streets like a scalpel. Jun-seok sat in the back seat, phone pressed to his ear, calling people, making arrangements, his mind already 3 steps ahead even though his heart was still back in that hospital room where his wife was laboring alone. He'd called Amara's phone 6 times. 6 times it went straight to voicemail, and each unanswered call felt like a small blade turning in his chest. She'd tried to reach him. She'd called the hospital to get him a message, and he'd been sitting in a boardroom talking about money while his wife was scared and alone, hurting, afraid. The guilt was worse than any physical pain he'd ever experienced. "How long?" he asked the driver. 10 minutes, maybe 7 if the traffic light cooperates, Hyung." 7 minutes. Jun-seok tried Amara's phone again, straight to voicemail. Her voice greeting him in that careful English that she'd been practicing. "Hi, you've reached Amara. I can't take this call right now, but please leave a message." She sounded so young on that recording, so optimistic, so unaware of all the ways the world could hurt you. He left a message anyway. "Yobo, I'm coming. I'm almost there. Don't be scared, I'm coming." The words felt inadequate. They were inadequate. There was nothing he could say that would fix the fact that he hadn't answered, hadn't been there, hadn't chosen her first. His phone buzzed with a call, from the hospital administrator. He picked up immediately. "Is she all right?" "Yes, sir. A doctor has been assigned to the case. We're monitoring her very closely. I assure you, your wife is receiving the best possible care." "Who's the attending nurse?" Jun-seok cut him off. Pause. "Sir?" "The attending nurse on the VIP floor. I want to know her name." "That would be Nurse Seomira. She's very experienced." Jun-seok ended the call. He had names now. Locations. The beginning of a puzzle that he'd start to understand once he saw his wife. Once he knew what had actually happened to her while he was sitting in a boardroom making deals. The car made a sharp turn, and Seoul's harbor came into view below them. In daylight, it was almost beautiful. In the pre-dawn gray, it just looked industrial, cold. Jun-seok called his intelligence officer. "Hyung?" The man picked up immediately. It was past 4 in the morning, but loyalty meant always being available. "Run a background." "On a nurse," Jun-seok said. "Name is Seomira, works at Nari Grace Hospital, VIP maternity floor. I want everything. Family, financial history, criminal records, everything." "Done, Hyung. Anything else?" "Yes," Jun-seok said. "Get me the security footage from my wife's hospital room for the past 4 hours, and find out if there's anyone at that hospital who has a grudge against me." He didn't wait for a response before hanging up. The car pulled up to the Nari Grace Hospital's main entrance at 4:52 a.m. Junseok was out before the car fully stopped, striding through the automatic doors, his tailored suit and expensive watch marking him as someone who mattered, someone for whom the normal rules bent. He found the elevator, pressed the button for the 27th floor, waited. The numbers climbed: 15, 16, 17. He'd walked toward death before. He'd stood across from men who wanted to kill him. He'd made decisions that ended lives. None of that had scared him the way this moment scared him. The not knowing, the helplessness, the fact that there was no enemy he could confront, no decision he could make that would undo the hours his wife had spent alone. The elevator doors opened on the 27th floor. The VIP maternity wing was silent. Too silent. The soft music Junseok remembered from the tour 3 months ago was absent. The corridor lights seemed to buzz differently. The whole floor had the feeling of a place where something was very wrong. Amara's room was at the end of the hall. He could see the light spilling out from underneath the door. He could hear the steady beep of monitors. He couldn't hear her, and that was somehow the worst part. He walked toward the door, every step feeling like it took hours. His hand was on the handle before he allowed himself to prepare for what he might find inside. Then he opened it. Amara was curled on her side, one hand clenching the bed rail, the other pressed protectively against her swollen belly. Her face was turned toward the wall. Junseok's eyes went immediately to her left cheek, to the swelling there, the discoloration, the very obvious handprint that marked her skin like a brand. He stopped breathing. It was just for a moment, just a second where his lungs refused to expand, where his entire world compressed down to that single fact. Someone had hit his wife while she was in labor, while she was helpless, while he was making deals about shipping routes and harbor access. Then the rest of his senses came back online. He saw the wet pillow, the way her body was trembling slightly, the monitors beside the bed showing her heart rate elevated, her blood pressure climbing, her stress levels marked in waves of data. He saw everything, and none of it was the way it should have been. "Elena," he said softly. That was the English version of her name, the one he used sometimes in bed, in the mornings, in moments of tenderness. "Yobo, I'm here." She lifted her eyes at the sound of his voice. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, relief flooded her features. And then, almost immediately, something else took over. Shame. As if she was embarrassed. As if any of this was her fault. Junseok walked to the bed and knelt beside it. His expensive suit be damned. He reached out carefully, hovering his hands near her face without touching, because he wanted to touch her so badly but was terrified of causing more pain. "Who did this?" His voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of a volcano before an eruption. "Yobo, who did this to you?" Amara's eyes filled with tears. "The nurse," she whispered. "Mira. When I asked for help, when I tried to call you again, she just hit me. And then she locked the door. She locked me in, and I couldn't call for anyone, and I didn't know what to do." Another contraction was starting. Junseok could see the shift in her body, the way she tensed, the way she tried to breathe through the pain. "Don't talk," he said gently. "Just breathe. I'm going to fix this." He held her hand through the contraction, counting the seconds with her, feeling the strength of her grip as the pain peaked and finally released her. When it passed, she looked at him with exhausted eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "For calling you. For not being strong enough. For—" "Stop," Junseok said firmly. He reached out and very gently touched her cheek, avoiding the bruise. "Nothing is your fault. You did nothing wrong. You called for help, and no one came. That's not weakness. That's what happens when the system fails you. He stood up. Where are you going? Amara asked, panic rising in her voice. I'm going to take care of this, he said. He walked to the door, opened it, stepped into the hallway. The VIP floor was still quiet, still eerily empty. He called out, not loudly but with the kind of tone that made people respond. I need the head nurse on this floor, now. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, people started to appear. A nurse poked her head around the corner at the nurse's station, 50 feet away. A nursing assistant stuck his head out of a room. The night receptionist, who'd been reading something behind the desk, suddenly looked very alert. They all recognized something in him. Maybe the expensive suit, maybe the way he moved, maybe just the pure weight of command that he carried, and understood that this was not a regular patient's family member. Did anyone hear me? Junseok asked. Still calm, still quiet, still more dangerous than if he'd been screaming. I need the head nurse, specifically Nurse Seomira. There was a moment of hesitation. Then one of the nurses, the older one, with tired eyes that suggested she'd worked more nights than daylight shifts, started walking toward him. I'm the night supervisor, she said carefully. Can I help you? Where is Nurse Seomira? She's on break, I believe. Can I get you something? Is your wife all right? My wife has a handprint on her face, Junseok said, which suggests that she was hit by someone. I'd like to know who that someone is. The night supervisor's expression changed. What? No, that's not. There must be a misunderstanding. Get Seomira, Junseok interrupted, or I start calling people. And I assure you, the people I call will ask much less politely than I am asking now. It took 5 minutes. Seomira appeared from somewhere. A break room, a closet, the kind of place where people hid when they didn't want to be found. Her professional smile was in place, her uniform was pristine, and her composure was carefully constructed. It fell apart the moment she saw Junseok's face, because she recognized him. Of course she recognized him. Han Junseok's picture had probably been in the news 100 times. She'd likely heard his name whispered in fear across the city. She just hadn't expected to meet him at 5:03 in the morning on the maternity floor of the hospital where she worked. Mr. Han, she said, and her voice had gone very carefully neutral. Is something wrong with your wife? Yes, Junseok said. Something is very wrong. She has a bruise on her cheek in the exact shape of a human hand. She's been locked in her room for hours. Her call button has been disabled. And she's been alone, in active labor, with no medical supervision. So I'm going to ask you one question. Seomira, did you hit my wife? Mira's face went pale, then red. That's absolutely not. She was being hysterical. She was pressing the call button repeatedly for no reason, disturbing everyone on this floor, and I was trying to... Did you hit her? Junseok repeated. His voice didn't change. It didn't need to. I may have been firm with her, Mira said carefully, but I would never... Show me your hands. Excuse me? Your hands, Junseok said. Show them to me. Mira hesitated. The night supervisor shifted, uncomfortably. Down the hall, other staff members tried very hard to look like they weren't listening. Slowly, Mira held out her hands, palms up, and there it was. A faint redness across her right palm. The kind of mark that came from striking something, or someone. That matches the bruise on my wife's face exactly, Junseok said softly. That's interesting, don't you think? Because it suggests that you hit a laboring woman in active pain, without any medical justification, and then left her alone in a locked room. Mira's composure cracked completely. Do you have any idea what people like you have done? She hissed. What your business has destroyed? My husband? Your husband, Junseok finished. Yes, I've heard the story. He was fired for embezzlement. He was given the option to resign quietly or face prosecution. He chose resignation. That was his choice. That was the consequence of his actions. He didn't deserve— I don't care, Jun Seok interrupted. I don't care about your husband's story. I don't care about your anger or your grievances or your righteous sense of injustice. What I care about is the fact that you took all of that and directed it at a woman who has never done anything to you. A woman who was vulnerable. A woman who needed help. He stepped closer, not threatening, just present. The kind of presence that made people remember why they were afraid of him. You assaulted a patient, he said. You violated your oath as a nurse. You committed a crime. And now you're going to live with the consequences of that choice. He turned to the night supervisor. Call security, he said, and call the police. I want a report filed for assault. I want all CCTV footage from my wife's room backed up and preserved. And I want every member of staff who knew what was happening in this ward to be documented. The night supervisor nodded, already moving to the phone. Behind her, other staff members pretended to be very busy with very important tasks. Mira started to say something, but Jun Seok held up a hand. Save it, he said. You can explain yourself to the police. You can explain yourself to a lawyer, but not to me. He turned and walked back into his wife's room, leaving Mira standing alone in the hallway, surrounded by staff who'd just witnessed the moment her entire life changed direction. 20 minutes later, the hospital administrator arrived. He was a man in his 60s, with the bearing of someone who'd spent his entire career trying not to make waves and failing. His name was Park Sung-ho, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Mr. Han, he said, appearing in the doorway to Amara's room. I've personally overseen the situation. Everything is being handled. We're preparing a formal investigation and— I don't care about your investigation, Jun Seok said. He was sitting beside Amara's bed, holding her hand through a contraction. I care about facts. I care about security footage. I care about why a nurse was allowed to remain on duty after assaulting a patient. Park Sung-ho wrung his hands. The footage from the room itself is, of course, limited due to privacy concerns. But there's corridor footage, Jun Seok said. It wasn't a question. Yes, but we would need— Get it, Jun Seok interrupted. Now. And get me the personnel file for Nurse Seomira. I want to know her entire history of complaints, disciplinary actions, anything that might suggest she had a pattern of abuse. Park Sung-ho's face went paler. Yes, of course. I'll have our IT department. Not later, Jun Seok said. Now, while I'm standing here. I have all night. And in that moment, Park Sung-ho understood something crucial. That Han Jun Seok wasn't actually asking. That this wasn't a negotiation or a request that could be delayed or deferred. That the man sitting beside a laboring woman was not going to be satisfied with promises or apologies, or the usual hospital procedures for handling complaints. This was someone who actually had the power to make things happen, and he was choosing to use that power on his wife's behalf. I'll make a call, Park Sung-ho said. I'll have someone pull the footage immediately. 20 minutes later, they were in a small security room on the first floor, watching a screen where every moment of the assault played out in gray-toned clarity. Mira taking the phone. Mira turning off the call button. Mira locking the door. Mira's conversation with Amara, captured by the hallway camera outside the room. And then, the angle wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. The moment when Mira's hand flashed out and connected with Amara's cheek. Park Sung-ho watched the footage with a face that slowly turned from pale to ashen. This is extremely serious, he said. His voice had lost all its usual administrative polish. We will of course cooperate fully with any investigation. We will cover all medical costs. We will do whatever is necessary. You'll do exactly what I tell you to do, Jun Seok said calmly. And first, you're going to tell me how long Seomira has been working at this hospital, and how many other patients she's abused during that time. It took another 40 minutes for them to pull together the answer. The records showed 17 years of employment, 43 documented complaints, 42 of them dismissed without investigation or action. The patients in those complaints, when the descriptions were available, tended to be of similar profiles. Foreign women, wives of wealthy or powerful men, women who wouldn't have the social capital or language skills to pursue formal complaints. In other words, vulnerable women, easy targets. Jun Seok felt something inside him crystallize into absolute certainty. This wasn't just about Amara anymore. This was about a systemic failure, a hospital that had protected its staff member at the expense of its patients, a hierarchy that said some people mattered less than others. It was about everything he'd been trying to walk away from, all the injustice and abuse of power that he himself had participated in for so long. And it was hitting him now in full force, that he couldn't just walk away. That choosing legitimacy meant actually trying to fix some of what he'd broken. Who is Seomira's husband? Jun Seok asked. Park Sung-ho pulled up the file. According to her emergency contact information, his name is Seo Junho. The administrator's face went even paler. Oh no. What? He was fired from one of the shipping companies, Park Sung-ho said slowly. About 3 years ago. For embezzlement. It was handled quietly, but he was fired. Jun Seok nodded. He'd already suspected as much. His intelligence officer had sent him the information while he was sitting with Amara. Junho worked for a company with financial ties to the Han organization. Junho had been embezzling from that company. Junho had faced consequences for stealing, and his wife had been carrying that rage like a carefully wrapped bomb, waiting for the right person to detonate it against. She'd chosen Amara. Get me the footage, Jun Seok said, and get me a lawyer. We're filing charges tonight. By 6:47 a.m., the sun was rising over Seoul, and Jun Seok had watched the assault footage 7 times. Each time, it didn't get easier to watch his wife being struck. Each time, something inside him wanted to go back upstairs and do things that would require significantly more police involvement and significantly more legal representation. But he was trying not to do those things anymore. He was trying to be the kind of man whose daughter could be proud of him. The police had arrived just before dawn. 2 officers, a young one who looked deeply uncomfortable with the whole situation, and an older detective named Park Min-jun, who'd clearly seen enough in his career to not be shocked by much. The detective had taken Jun Seok's statement, reviewed the footage, and looked at Jun Seok with the careful attention of someone trying to read whether they were dealing with a man who'd seek legal justice or a man who'd seek revenge. We'll file charges for assault, Detective Park said. The footage is clear. Her nursing license will almost certainly be revoked pending investigation. This is a straightforward case. Almost certainly, Jun Seok repeated. So there's a chance she walks away from this. I wouldn't say that, Detective Park replied carefully. But the legal system is slow. It takes time. Jun Seok stood up from the security room chair. How much time? Months, likely. Years, if there's an appeal. That's unacceptable. Detective Park studied him. What are you thinking, Mr. Han? I'm thinking, Jun Seok said slowly, that this hospital has a systemic problem. That Nurse Seomira is not an isolated incident. That there are probably other victims, other women who didn't feel empowered enough to report her, who didn't have husbands powerful enough to demand security footage and police intervention. That's possible, Detective Park agreed. So I'm going to do 2 things, Jun Seok said. First, I'm going to ensure that everyone involved in protecting her, everyone who was aware of the complaints and did nothing, faces the same level of scrutiny. Second, I'm going to make sure this hospital implements changes that prevent it from happening again. He looked at the detective directly. And third, he continued, I'm going to do this through legal channels because if I don't, my daughter grows up thinking the only way to fix injustice is violence. Detective Park smiled. Just slightly, just enough to suggest that whatever he'd been worried about, that Jun Seok was going to take matters into his own hands, had just been put to rest. Then we have a lot of work to do, the detective said. If you were in his place, would you forgive, call the police, or take revenge yourself? Comment what you'd do before you see the shocking decision he makes. They moved Seo Mira to the custody of the police. She left the hospital in handcuffs, her face a mix of defiance and fear, and Jun Seok felt nothing watching her go. Just the cold, clean understanding that actions had consequences, that she'd made a choice, and that choice was going to change the trajectory of her life. She'd made the choice to hit a pregnant woman. She'd made the choice to lock a laboring woman in a room. She'd made the choice to blame someone for the consequences of her own husband's actions. Now she'd have to live with what that choice meant. Jun Seok returned to Amara's room on the 27th floor. The administrator had, in his nervous scrambling, managed to accomplish one useful thing. He'd assigned a new nurse. Her name was Han Seo-yun, and she was older, with silver hair and the kind of calm that only came from actually giving a shit about her patients. She was just adjusting Amara's pillows when he entered. Your wife is doing beautifully, Seo-yun said in English, her accent thick, but her tone genuinely warm. The contractions are very close now. I think your baby will be here soon. Thank you, Jun Seok said. He meant it with every part of himself. The new nurse nodded and quietly excused herself, understanding that this moment, his wife's eyes lifting to meet his, the way his entire expression changed when he looked at her, was sacred. Jun Seok knelt beside Amara's bed and took her hand. What happened? She asked. What did you do? The nurse has been arrested, he said. Assault charges. The police are investigating the hospital's handling of previous complaints, and the hospital administration has agreed to implement a full review of their staff practices. Amara stared at him. You did all that? What time is it? 6:52 in the morning, Jun Seok said. And I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because that woman hurt you. Because this hospital failed you. And because I'm not going to let what happened to you happen to anyone else if I can prevent it. Another contraction was building. He held her hand through it, counted through the pain with her, felt the strength in her grip as her body worked toward bringing their daughter into the world. When it passed, she was crying. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I was so scared that you'd do something that couldn't be undone, but you're actually going to fix this. I'm going to try, Jun Seok said. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of contractions and breathing and the sound of his voice counting, encouraging, promising that he was there and would not leave again. At 9:47 a.m., Dr. Kim, the competent, calm physician who'd been assigned after Amara had called the hospital, nodded with satisfaction. It's time, she said. Are you ready? Amara looked at Jun Seok. He nodded. We're ready. Together. The next 30 minutes were a chaos of effort and pain and a kind of surrender that Amara had never experienced before. Her body was doing something ancient and powerful, something that transcended the fear and the anger and the trauma of the night. And Jun Seok was right there, bearing witness, offering his strength, believing in her even when she didn't believe in herself. One more push, Dr. Kim said. I can see the head. She's almost here. Amara gathered every remaining bit of strength she had. The world narrowed down to this: the pain and the effort and the absolute certainty that she was about to meet her daughter. She pushed and pushed and pushed. And suddenly, there was a sound. A small, indignant cry that filled the room with life and hope and the reality that they had made it through the night alive. Dr. Kim placed a tiny, perfect infant on Amara's chest. Nari. They'd chosen the name months ago. Korean for Lily. Beautiful and resilient. Nari was 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with dark skin and a strong cry and a head full of black hair. She was the most beautiful thing Junseok had ever seen. He knelt beside the bed and cried. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel the absolute magnitude of what had just happened. That he was a father now. That he had a daughter. That she was here, and she was alive, and she was safe. "Hi, baby," Amara whispered to Nari, her voice cracking with emotion. "Hi, sweetheart. We've been waiting for you." Junseok reached down and let Nari wrap her impossibly tiny fingers around his. The sensation of it, her grip, her warmth, her presence, undid something in him that he hadn't known was broken. "She's perfect," he managed to say. "You're both perfect," Amara said, and she reached up with her free hand to touch his face. "Thank you. For believing me. For protecting her. For choosing us." Junseok kissed her forehead, then kissed Nari's impossibly small hand. "Always," he promised. "I will always choose you both." Nurse Seo-yoon gave them time together, quietly cleaning up, giving the new family the kind of privacy that should have been there all night. When she finally approached, she did it with gentleness, explaining everything before she did it, treating Amara with a respect that stood in such stark contrast to Mira's treatment that it almost made the night worse in retrospect. But it also made it better. Because it showed that there were good people, that not everyone in this system was broken. "She's strong," Seo-yoon said as she performed the newborn tests. "Good lungs, good color, perfect in every way. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, 19 inches. Absolutely beautiful." She wrapped Nari in a soft blanket and returned her to Amara's arms. "What will you name her?" Seo-yoon asked. Amara and Junseok looked at each other. They'd had this conversation a dozen times, lying in bed late at night, imagining this moment. "Nari," Amara said softly. "It means Lily in Korean. Her middle name will be Grace." Seo-yoon's expression softened. "Nari Grace. Beautiful. It suits her." After the nurse left, they sat in the morning light coming through the window, and for the first time in hours, Junseok let himself relax slightly. The danger wasn't entirely over. There would be investigations, legal proceedings, fallout from his walking out on the harbor deal. There would be consequences from men who didn't appreciate being disrespected, even if that disrespect was in the name of family. But Amara was safe. Nari was safe, and he had chosen to be the kind of man who made that choice. "What are you thinking?" Amara asked, watching him watch their daughter. "That I was so wrong about so many things," Junseok said. "I thought power was about money, about territory, about control. But watching you bring her into the world, I understand now that real power is just this: being here, being present, choosing the people you love above everything else." "Even the harbor deal?" Amara asked gently. "Especially the harbor deal," he said. "Let them have their legitimate way out. I'll find another path. But I'm not sacrificing you and our daughter for any business." He leaned down and kissed Amara's forehead, then Nari's tiny head. "I love you both so much," he whispered. "If you believe real strength is protecting the helpless, not abusing them, hit like and make sure you're subscribed. This Mafia father is just getting started." Detective Park Min-jun visited on the second day. He brought coffee and an expression that suggested he'd been burning the midnight oil on the case. "We've opened a full investigation," he said, sitting in the visitor's chair in Amara's new recovery room. "SEO Mira has been charged with assault. We're also looking into whether there's a pattern of abuse with other patients." How many others? Junseok asked. We've identified at least 6 women in the past 5 years who filed complaints against her. Those complaints were filed informally, and they were apparently never pursued. We're contacting them now, trying to determine if they want to press charges. Junseok felt something cold settle in his chest. 6 women. Maybe more who never reported. And the hospital had known and done nothing. What about her husband? He asked. The one who was fired from the shipping company. Seo Junho, Detective Park confirmed. We're investigating whether he was involved in this assault, whether there was any kind of conspiracy, but based on the evidence, it looks like Mira acted alone, motivated by her own anger at what happened to her husband. He committed a crime, Amara said quietly. He embezzled. He was caught. That's not this hospital's fault. That's not my husband's fault. That's his own. I agree, Detective Park said, and I think a competent lawyer will make that very clear to a judge. Mira took her anger at the consequences of her husband's own actions and took it out on you. That's assault, regardless of her motivation. He set a folder on the table. These are the personnel files you requested. The hospital is cooperating fully with the investigation, and your husband's legal team has been working on a larger civil suit against the hospital for negligent supervision and enabling a pattern of abuse. Junseok opened the folder. 43 complaints over 17 years, an average of roughly 1 complaint every 4 months, and every single one dismissed without investigation or action. This is criminal negligence, he said. It is, Detective Park agreed, which is why the hospital administration is in serious trouble. The board is talking about firing the director, implementing new policies, bringing in outside oversight. They understand that they've created a significant liability. He finished his coffee and stood to leave. Whatever you're planning to do. With this, Detective Park said, looking directly at Junseok. Make sure it's legal. I appreciate what you're doing, the attempt to protect victims, to demand accountability. But I need you to do it through proper channels. Agreed? Junseok met his eyes. Agreed. Good, Detective Park said. Then I'll stay out of your way. After the detective left, Junseok made phone calls. He called his lawyer and asked her to draft plans for systemic changes to hospital oversight, independent patient advocacy, anonymous reporting hotlines, mandatory training on cultural competency and abuse recognition, regular third-party audits, automatic suspension for any staff member accused of physical abuse pending investigation. He called his intelligence officer and asked him to compile a list of every hospital in Seoul that might have similar issues, similar systemic failures, similar patterns of protecting abusers over protecting patients. He called the hospital administrator and told him exactly what needed to change and what timeline he expected it to happen on. And he held his daughter while she slept and thought about the world he wanted her to grow up in. 3 days later, while Amara and Nari were resting, Junseok sat in his office in the basement of his home and watched the news. The harbor scandal was being picked up by every major outlet. Exclusive shipping licenses, Han Junseok's departure from the negotiation, Chairman Choi's obvious shock that a man would walk away from hundreds of millions of won. But there was another story brewing underneath that one that the mainstream media was still dancing around, but that people in his world understood perfectly. Han Junseok had walked away from the deal. He'd chosen his wife over business, and now he was trying to reform a hospital, implement oversight, expose corruption, which meant he was either actually trying to change or he was trying to consolidate power in a different way. Either way, he was drawing attention to things that certain people preferred to keep quiet. Junseok got a call from his older contact in the organization, a man named Min Tae-yang who'd known his father and now controlled the northern operations. We need to talk, Tae-yang said simply. They met in a basement bar that had no official name and no obvious entrance, the kind of place where deals were made and people disappeared without leaving a trace. Min Tae-yang was drinking alone when Jun Seok arrived. He was in his 60s, with scars on his hands and a way of moving that suggested violence was always an option. "You're making waves," Tae-yang said, drawing attention to hospitals, police, prosecutors. "This isn't good for business." "I'm not making waves," Jun Seok replied calmly. "I'm making sure a nurse faces consequences for assaulting my wife." "And in doing so," Tae-yang continued, "you're forcing other institutions to look at their systems, to audit their practices, to invite outside oversight." He leaned forward. "Do you understand how many hospitals profit from the kind of silence that nurse was protected by? How many of our business associates benefit from systems that don't ask questions?" "I don't care," Jun Seok said. "You should," Tae-yang replied, "because some of those men are very powerful and they're very angry that you're rocking the boat. There's talk about whether you're even still one of us, whether you've gone too soft." "I've gone legitimate," Jun Seok said. "Trying to be anyway. And as for whether I'm still one of you, I don't need to be. My daughter doesn't need a father who's one of them. She needs a father she can be proud of." Tae-young stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. But it was a sad smile. "You know that's not possible, right?" he said. "You can't walk away clean. You can't force a reformation and not make enemies. You're going to have to choose, eventually, between your daughter's pride and her safety." "Then I'll choose safety," Jun Seok said. "And I'll teach her that real strength is protecting what you love, not controlling it through fear." He stood to leave. "If you come after me," he said, "I'll come after you with every resource I have, legally, financially, with media exposure, whatever it takes. And if you hurt my family, I'll remember how to do things the old way. Understood?" Tae-young picked up his drink. "Perfectly." Jun Seok walked out of the bar knowing that he'd just declared war on a fundamental part of who he used to be. That forces were now in motion that would take years to resolve. Enemies were being created, and there was no backing away from this path. He'd chosen his daughter. Now he'd have to live with what that choice meant. That night, Jun Seok stood on the balcony of his penthouse apartment, holding his sleeping daughter against his chest. Seoul was spread out below him, a vast sea of lights and buildings, and millions of lives being lived. Beautiful and broken, kind and cruel, full of people trying their best and people who'd given up trying. "I'm sorry," he whispered to Nari, even though she was asleep and couldn't hear him. "I'm sorry about the world you were born into. I'm sorry about the mess I've made of things. I'm sorry that your father is the kind of man that your mother's family calls a criminal and my family calls a boss." He shifted her weight slightly, making sure she was comfortable, marveling at how small she was, how perfect, how completely dependent on him and Amara to keep her safe. "But I'm going to do something," he continued. "I'm going to try to fix some of what I've broken. I'm going to make sure this city is a little bit safer than it was when I found out you were coming. And if that makes enemies, if that starts a war, then so be it. Because you're here now, and you're everything, and I'm not going to waste the time I have with you on anything that doesn't serve you and your mother." The door opened behind him. Amara, still moving carefully but getting stronger every day. "Come inside," she said softly. "It's cold." Jun Seok turned and Nari stirred slightly in his arms, seeking warmth. "I was just making promises to our daughter," he said. "Promises about the world we're going to build for her." Amara took his arm gently. "What kind of promises?" "That she'll grow up knowing her mother is the strongest person I've ever met. That she'll understand that real power is protecting people, not controlling them. That she'll be proud of her father, even if her father has to fight some very dangerous people to become someone worthy of that pride." They stood together, the three of them, looking out at the city. "We can do that," Amara said. "Together, we can do anything." Junseok kissed his wife and his daughter and held them close. Together, he promised. Always. If you made it to the end, comment "Stronger Together" so I know. You're here with this family. Share this with someone who needs hope, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this Mafia father's story.